Welcome to Everything Life Coaching. I'm John Kim.
And I'm Noelle Cordeaux. We are the founders of Lumia.
And we're super passionate about all things coaching, and we want to share what we've learned from over a decade of coaching and training thousands of life coaches.
Let's dive into the science and magic of coaching.
On this week's episode, we're going to talk about the foundations of well-being for managers. Noelle, good afternoon.
How are you?
I'm well. We are podcasting a little bit later today. And for Noelle, she's 3 hours after me. So for her, it's like midday, correct?
I know. I'm missing my usual coffee that I have when we do this, but I would be up all night if I had a coffee at 4 p.m.
Yeah, this means there's a small chance that she may crash while we're talking.
I may. This is the day that my brain short circuits, and we'll have it recorded for posterity.
Well, speaking of crashing, our topic, foundations for well-being, especially for managers.
Yeah. So let me just pull the lens way out and explain what we're going to be talking about and why and how it relates to coaching and management. So really broadly, something that we hear from folks who are managers is I got promoted to being a manager because I'm really good at my job. And I was promised the world by my employer when they said, we're going to develop you, we're going to invest in you. And before I knew it, I was in charge of 15 people and things are not going well. I don't know what to do. And oftentimes that comes from the fact that when folks advance into the position of management, being good at your job isn't enough. You actually have to have psychosocial skills, and you really specifically need to be able to support, engage, and inspire people in order to be able to lead them.
Yeah, that's really important. Can you, for people who are unclear, tell us what you mean by psychosocial?
Yeah. So psychosocial is a combination of your brain and how you function socially.
Right.
And it really specifically relates to your familiarity with the way that people work and how you need to show up, adapt, and are perceived in social situations from a psychological perspective, because you have impact on people when you show up in any situation, but especially one between a manager and an employee in which there's a power dynamic.
Right.
Differential, that's where this psychosocial comes in, because there's this extra layer. You're not just peers working next to each other. There's a psychosocial component that governs whether it's a good experience or a bad experience.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people who don't have this end up leading just by barking orders, what needs to get done. Yeah. And it's hard to follow a leader like that because, you don't see them as human. You just see them as, someone pointing fingers and almost robotic.
Absolutely. And for a really long time, what you just described is called command and control leadership. And for the last, 150 years, that's been the way that society's worked. It stems from white supremacy. It stems from capitalism. It stems from patriarchal thinking where the man is the head of the household. Do as I say, don't ask questions. Women are prettier when they shut the fuck up, So it's like, all of those things go into this idea that when you're in charge of someone as a manager, which you're not actually in charge, let's be real, you have to control them and command them.
And there's something about not being able to, which I think a lot of leaders, managers internalize as then they're not a good leader. And so it's almost like if they can't get someone to do what they want, then they feel less than. And because that is valuable to them, they really try to control people.
Oh, yeah. I mean, now we're getting into like Machiavelli, right? Like, is it better to be loved or feared as a leader? Right. And in today's day and age, with hybrid and distributed workforces and such steep competition for talent and younger generations who just don't put up with shit anymore, it is better to be loved. We know
Yeah.
that empirically.
Yeah. Can I share a quick story, which is
Yes.
exactly on this topic? So, I got up in the morning and I was on New York time. So I was up way early. My assistant is in LA, and there was a mess up with the podcast. And my podcast is 3 times a week. So I was scrambling to fix it. I texted her and she says, yes, I'll get to it. But my work starts at 8 a.m. And it's interesting because there was a part of me that was like, of course, that, she's drawing boundaries and she's creating a safe space for her. And that's totally fair. Her work starts at 8 a.m. And then there was another part of me that was, that lacked this, psychosocial or the human approach, and was like angry and wanted things. Like there's a part of me that was being impatient and, I don't care when your day starts. You need to do this now. Right. And so it was interesting for me, to kind of go through that experience and notice the different parts of me as a leader or as a quote unquote boss.
Absolutely. And this is one of the things that is so little talked about in the managerial and leadership space. What it feels like on the inside for you as you grapple with social interactions day in and day out, and where your responsibility truly lies, which is what we're going to unpack today. And before we do, I want to give a primer on what we're unpacking. So we're going to look at positive psychology, and we're going to look at parts of positive psychology that have been really empirically proven. So like the data, the research is solid. If you want a deeper dive on this stuff, there's a great book called Creating the World That We Want to Live In, How Positive Psychology Can Build a Brighter Future. And it covers everything from relationships to work to community to environment. And it's really good. But all that said, we're dealing with science here. And a lot of times when we're thinking about soft skills, dealing with the way that we feel, dealing with the way that we communicate, dealing with the way that we lead, folks don't typically associate it with empirically based standards, which is what we're going to get into. And the other piece of this is that we're going to roll through several principles, and there's actually a pretty serious consequence. When we ignore these principles, it's not like, oh, we're neutral. We're actively harmful to ourselves and others.
Right.
So the first one is pretty straightforward and yet very difficult. And that's the idea that when you are a manager and you're looking out at your staff, your team, the people around you, and your staff, your team are looking around them, everyone has a need to feel connected to others.
Yeah. I mean, I think feeling alone is probably the most dangerous, unhealthy thing at work, when you're feeling alone. And also it's hard to work when you're feeling alone.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And this is also something that's really confusing for folks, because for a really long time, there was this idea that you need to leave your humanity at home and you come to work and you're a robot and you should be grateful to have a job. And the world has changed. Yeah. That's no longer true. You're expected to not only bring your whole self to work, which is scary for folks, but managers are expected to tend to the whole self of their employees, and they just don't know how to do it. As we're thinking about this in terms of like the tactical how, we can look to coach training and the ICF core competencies. And there are a couple of different areas where coach training really supports folks in helping to create an environment where people feel connected. And those core competencies are cultivating trust and safety, coaching presence, as well as ethics. So those are the coaching standards. And then let's get into the science of it. So, you shared that feeling alone is one of the worst things. From a clinical perspective, what does loneliness do to folks?
Loneliness depresses people.
Yeah.
It makes you feel discouraged. When you feel very alone, there's a sense of hopelessness that comes with that.
Mm-hmm. It does. And that hopelessness impacts our immune system. And it takes a really negative toll on your health. It makes folks more susceptible to infection, and it also increases mortality. So if we're looking at this in relationship to our workforce, and you're a manager, if you have a team member who's not connected or isolated, that person's going to be more likely to get sick.
Yeah, yeah, and I gotta say, it could be a low grade loneliness, like dysthymia. It doesn't have to be a loneliness that is terrifying. Usually, it's the drip, that the leaky faucet that can drown you. It's not because we don't notice that, and then it's been years, and then we realize how lonely we've really been. So what's scary is when people are lonely without even realizing they're lonely.
Absolutely. And when we're talking about this in terms of our work lives, we know that one of the best things that people can have is a friend at work. And without that, I've described it to folks within corporations as, if you don't take the time to care for your people, these are the slow, everyday paper cuts that are going to cause folks to bleed out on the floor.
Yeah. When I look at some of the jobs that I didn't like in my whole career, it was the people that got me through. It was the coworkers that I bonded with, or that, we shared donuts with, or we just kind of like told jokes. And those are the people that got me through the hard days at work, especially the jobs that I took on that I really didn't like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And in the jobs that you really didn't like, how did you perceive your managers?
Oh, in one job, the manager was like Darth Vader. She was terrifying, and every day we felt that our job was threatened. So we connected, and we consoled each other, and that made us close. But the leader was separate. She was on the top shelf. She was untouchable, and then there were us. Right. Yeah. And so the positive thing about that is that it made us close. Obviously it wasn't a healthy environment to work in. Eventually I got let go. Yeah.
So that's a great little case study there. So, when we move in and we run coach training for managers, these are the things that we directly train people on, what not to do and what to do. And the interesting thing, about this work is, with this particular topic, the work that you do is actually internal. So you deal with yourself and you deal with what's going on in your own head. So if you're managing other people and you feel yourself holding contempt for someone, or superiority over someone, or blaming someone, that is your first indication. And I don't say this lightly. I say this with the full weight of empirical evidence that you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the important thing to understand about this is that these aspects of negative behavior are normal. They're human, and they're cues to us that we need to do some work. What happens when folks engage in these behaviors, contempt, superiority, and blame? The person who exhibits these behaviors causes harm. And then the secondary part of it that is pretty invisible is that the person who issues the behaviors, contempt, superiority, and blame, actually hurts themselves because they cut themselves off from their own capacity to connect with the group. And that's exactly what you described when you were talking about that boss.
Yeah. What's interesting is she also creates her own island. So I'm sure that she was very lonely running that company.
Probably miserable. I mean, there's no positive outcomes that roll with contempt, superiority, and blame. And so let's talk about what we can do instead. From a positive psychology perspective, the term is seeking common humanity, to see no strangers. And then from a coaching perspective, that really involves bias work and self-awareness work to begin to be aware of how others are consuming you, to begin to harness your capacity to create space and pause and presence and acknowledge that you might have these unruly feelings, and also acknowledge that they don't really have a place in what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about self-awareness basically as a leader, as a manager. Yeah.
We are. And that's one of those terms where it's like, do you have self-awareness? I don't know. Do I? Okay. Well, are you aware of the emotions that come up for you and whether they help you or hurt you throughout a day? It's basically an emotional audit.
Yes, that's exactly what I did with my little example with the assistant. Instead of picking up the phone, I decided to take a beat and evaluate what are my feelings and how do I want to respond to this. So I am an empathetic leader and a fair leader, and not someone who is, like the Iron Fist lady that laid me off many years ago. I didn't want my assistant to feel that way, unheard, unsupported, and alone. So, yeah, taking a beat and doing a self-examination.
Yeah. So another area that we can take a look at that I know for a fact is going to have resonance for you is that when we're thinking about what people need foundationally for well-being, especially at work, it is having a sense of autonomy. And this means that we have a choice rather than feeling coerced or controlled. What has your relationship been like with this premise?
Autonomy? Well, when I think about where I came from, in a lot of the companies or private companies that I've worked for as an employee, how that made me feel, what was the outcome of that, as in my being productive or what I was creating, and then compare that to today, including us working together. I mean, it's day and night. I mean, it's equivalent to a plant that isn't watered and is wilted. That's like, the beginning of my career. And then a plant that is in a giant pot and watered and tons of sun, and it's growing and smiling and thriving,
That's awesome.
I speaking of plants, when I first met you in that email, I said something like, I felt like a plant growing its pot or outgrowing its pot or something like that, right?
Yes, you did. Yeah. That was, you said, help, I'm a plant that's outgrown its pot. And I was like, oh,
and that was because at that moment, that was the, when I stopped punching clocks and started to work on my own and, drew boundaries and started to work in a way that was honest to me. And then I felt like that's when I started to kind of grow and thrive as a human.
Yeah. So at an individual level, in our everyday lives, this can look like being able to choose what we eat, what we wear every day. And that actually factors into our work lives as well. But more broadly, at the organizational level, this means giving folks the opportunity to be involved in decision-making, communication about our work, communication about things that specifically affect an employee, and basic respect. One of the number one things that chips away at trust and respect in relationship to autonomy is blindsiding someone.
Yeah. Well, that blindsiding someone it can be an act of violence.
It can be. It absolutely can be. And then on the flip side, what we know empirically is that when we give folks the ability to co-create or give feedback or participate in something that affects them, the interpersonal engagement is much more effective. And also any policies that stem from that engagement are much more effective. So for example, if you give everyone on your team the opportunity to contribute to what they think the dress code should be, everyone's more likely to adhere to it because they were part of that decision making.
Right. It's collective.
It is collective, absolutely. And something to to think about is that this aspect of giving folks autonomy can really be a gift, because right now the world is beating us down with a lot of things that are beyond our control: global warming, war, economic upheaval, and so many people are reeling from a loss of control. And when I think about leadership in our time, to me, one of the most important things that I can do is actually give people their own little piece of real estate, so that they have ownership of something, that they can take action on something, and they can be empowered in small ways, because I know that that will increase their well-being. As a human species, we are up against a lot right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's the best way to support and champion one story is exactly what you're talking about. And this is actually what we're doing with clients as a coach.
Yes. Oh yeah, absolutely. And this is, this is part and parcel of coaching, is empowering people to take action, empowering people to take ownership, taking small steps, taking their life back. And that bleeds right into our next foundation of well-being that's really important for people at work, and that's feeling competent. People need to feel a sense of competency in order to survive psychologically.
Sure.
Full stop. Yeah.
I mean, most people, because of our story, struggle with feeling competent already,
They do. They do. And, imposter syndrome, social construction, negativity bias is all working against us. So when we bring in coach training to help people, to help managers with how to help folks feel competent, it's actually really simple. It's listening actively to people, like really listening, repeating back to them what they've said to you, so that you demonstrate care and understanding, and evoking awareness, helping people identify what they see, what they feel, what went well, what needs course correction, and pushing that back on someone to say, wow, look, you figured that out.
Validation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Something that I think is important to kind of outline within this construct: when you're a manager, you're typically evaluating someone for performance. And when people try new things, they're not going to be competent at first.
Right.
It's just true. And that's normal. But what creates the tipping point between someone developing, learning, and growing, or retreating back into incompetence is the experience that someone has around what it's like to try something new, miss the mark, and try again until they get it right.
And what a gift for the leader slash boss slash CEO to give that to their employee.
Right. And this is where that command and control leadership gets in the way, because I think it's our nature to be like, oh, let me just do it, or I'll take over, or, I'll do this for you, because you were promoted in the first place because you knew what you were doing. And what we're doing when we take the time constructively to be like, oh, well, what do you see here? Like, this was pretty good. It can be a little bit better. How do you think it could be a little bit better? It's not punitive. We're not shutting somebody down. We're not shredding them, and we're giving them a template from which to grow. And if you do this in tandem as employee and manager, you'll begin to trust your employees' capacity, and they will grow and learn in the way that you need them to.
Yes. And, the way that the world is unfolding, I think ultimately the people, the bosses or leaders who run their organization with an iron fist and just bark orders, they're going to die out, because no one's going to want to work for them. There are things like quiet quitting, which is a topic now, where people are not negotiating space and freedom and all the things that they want as far as in their work.
There was an NPR report that came out recently that was just scathing. And I read it and I was like, whoo, this author is not throwing or is not pulling any punches. And what was stated is that in the new age of a hybrid and distributed workforce, the bad boss is going to cause your organization to lose the talent wars.
Yeah, I agree. It's already happening. Yeah.
It is already happening. And so from there, what can we do to combat that? In the NPR report, the author stated that they were giving a case study of a friend who experienced a bad boss, and they described that bad boss as someone who performed productivity and had a need to really be on top of the hours that everyone's Slack light was on.
Yeah.
And that was a little bit crazy to me. I was like, wow, that happens, huh?
Well, yeah, I remember. So at my worst job, we had to sign out to go to the restroom, and then we had to sign back in after going to the restroom. And I'll never forget that, because that's always been the marker for me, which I will never go back to. But yeah, it was that extreme.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And so, what is the opposite of that? It's actually not measuring productivity according to like time, which when we look, oh my God, I read a lot of stuff, but something that I read once that really stuck out to me is like, okay, where did the idea of measuring productivity via time come from? It actually came from Soviet Russia. And the idea of measuring the worker and keeping the worker engaged in work for the benefit of the state. So it has some pretty gnarly origins. And then the antidote to it is to actually look at not the time that someone's spending working, but what's going well with their work.
Well, I'm glad things are changing.
Me too.
Yeah. And I'm glad we're having conversations about this.
Yeah. And so like, how does this go? Right. So it's pretty straightforward, and yet it's not natural for folks to do, because negativity bias keeps us in a position where we're always scanning for threat. And so to change your brain around to actually scan for what's positive is a shift.
Yeah. Yeah. It takes work. It takes to practice. It's a rewiring.
It does. And it has some pretty cool outcomes. And this comes from the work of Barbara Fredrickson, who I love, who is a positive psychology researcher. But when you take the time to put your focus on positive facts or traits, what it does is it actually increases your capacity for perception using your senses. So you are able to use your brain and your body in an enhanced function when you're in a positive state. And when you're in a negative state, you basically shut yourself down and you're only able to hold one view.
Oh, that's interesting.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you've experienced this shift in your own life over the decade that I've known you. What is your own relationship like with like noticing things now?
Yeah, of course. I mean, when I used to be miserable and unhappy, I would only notice and put weight on the dread, the dwelling, the things I have to do, where I'm not, what I don't have. And of course, 10 years later, and I still have to work at it, but I notice trees. I notice moments. I'm a lot more out of my head and in my body. And a lot of that is through the practice of refusing to focus on the negative and then leaning more into positives.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have one final foundation of well-being, and it's another one that's pretty amorphous. And that is being able to attach to a sense of meaning. We know that human beings as a species, when we are able to attach to a sense of meaning, we do better, we flourish, we care more, we show up harder. And for many folks at work, meaning is one of the things that staves off burnout.
Yeah. I mean, it's meaning is it's also bigger than you usually when you attach meaning, what it means to you.
Yeah. And this is all over the literature right now. MIT Sloan, the World Economic Forum, McKinsey, Gartner, everyone is publishing research on this right now because it doesn't come naturally to folks who are managers or to folks who have been in command and control systems their whole lives to pick their heads up and say, oh my God, I'm in charge of all these people. And it's also my job to help them attach to meaning in life.
Yeah.
It's a tall order.
It is. But I think also it also puts the leader in the position to be such an amazing catalyst, a bright spot in one person's life, not only for their job, but just on their whole trajectory, like in their story, just their life in general.
Absolutely. And the tactical how is so easy. It's really basically sitting with your team and saying, hey, gang, this is what our organization is doing in the world. This is what you are a part of. This is the visibility that our organization has. This is what you can brag about to your friends and family. This is all the cool stuff that you support, and then bring it right down to their specific roles. And the thing that you do supports our vision in this way. And having those conversations is not a one-time deal. It is something that needs to be repeated and reinforced consistently over time so that folks really get that, man, I'm a part of something. And the small things that I do every day really, truly matter.
Noelle, thank you for having a firm but soft psychological foundation of well-being.
You're welcome. And I have to say, I didn't get an MBA. I never set out to be a manager. I never set out to be a CEO. I did set out to be a coach. And so I learned how to do all of this stuff before I was ever in charge of anyone. And that's what helped me to develop this lens.
Right. Thank you for the conversation, and thank you for the leadership. And we will continue this conversation as it continues to unfold in our world and in coaching.
Absolutely. Thanks, John. Have a good one.
You too. Be well. Thanks for listening to Everything Life Coaching. If you're feeling the draw to become a coach, head to lumiacoaching.com/everything. Explore a new career that brings fulfillment, gives you a true sense of purpose, and a bold community to do it with.
Lumia is ready to equip you with the tools, training, and community you will need to reach your goals. If you're ready to build a unique coaching business on your own terms while making an impact on the world at large, Lumia is the next bold step in your coaching journey. That's lumiacoaching.com/everything.
And hey, if you're waiting for a sign, this is it.